Kingroon KP3S Pro 3D printer sitting right here, and laying on the table in front of me is the Y-axis linear rail upgrade kit. We're going to put this on coming up. Hi, I'm Roger. Welcome to the loft above the shop. And here I'm going to be upgrading this Kingroon KP3S Pro 3D printer to linear rails on the Y-axis. There's a kit that's available from Kingroon. The problem with this kit is there are no directions at all. There is a video somewhat on their website of kind of sort of how to put this on, but it's not really in detail. So what I'm going to do here is put this kit on, get everything aligned, set up, and I'm going to do it all in detail so you'll be able to understand everything. If you are super mechanically inclined, you may get bored with this, but a lot of people are going to have a problem with figuring out exactly how to get this put on correctly. Now, before you tear your printer apart, you're going to have to print a couple things. And there'll be a link in the description on where to download these from Kingroon's Google Drive. You're going to need these two parts, and you can 3D print them, and that will be to get the rail aligned. You only need to print one of each. If you wanted to try to do both at the same time, you can do two of each, but to me there's no point because it's going to be a one-time use thing, and it's an hour and a half print. And here's how I'm doing it. Okay, before you tear your printer apart, you're going to have to print a couple parts for getting these rails aligned. So I'm in Cura here. I've got my printer selected here, so I need to bring in the files. And there'll be a link in the description on where to get these off of Kingroon's website. So you're going to need one of these, and you're going to need one of these. And you could print four if you want to try to do both sides at the same time, but that's not necessary. I'm going to spread these apart just a hair. So I'm going to print them together. You don't need any support on these. And infill at 15% is fine because this is not something that's going to be a lot of weight on it. Adhesion, I am going to do that because it's cool up here. So I need to make a couple changes here. My build plate temperature is going to be 60 C because my room temperature is only 64 degrees Fahrenheit. And get down here, and I'm going to do a skirt. That should be sufficient. So I'll slice this. So an hour and 19 minutes to print that. I'll save that to SD card and I'll get it printing. Okay, so now you got your little alignment pieces, your alignment jigs. That's what these are. You have these printed, so put them off to one side. We're going to start by doing some disassembly. And one of the first things I'm going to do is take my filament off of there. I'll take my filament holder off because I am going to be laying this down on its back so you'll be able to get a good view of what I'm doing right underneath here. Oh, and you want to have your printer unplugged too, by the way. Don't have it plugged in. So what all's in this kit? Well, this is a PEI magnetic base I'm going to be adding on there. You got the base plate, you got the linear guide rails. This mounts to the bottom of this. This is where your belt will attach. And you got a whole bunch of hardware. It does come with one little alien wrench. I don't know why they only gave you one. There's some different parts in here, and as I said, there is absolutely no directions on this at all. You are going to need to have some alien wrenches, and I'm going to be using my ball drivers and drivers like this here rather than using the little L-handle ones. But that's optional. But there's T-nuts and washers and screws and nylock nut, another machine screw of some type, got a thumb screw, washers, lock washers. So we're going to muddle our way through this, I guess. But first we're going to have to do some disassembly. And one of the first things you're going to want to do is raise your Z-axis up so you've got some room under there to work. I'm just going to rotate the screw here. And yes, I've got a jumper in my filament sensor. I don't use it because of the way I have my filament mounted. At some point I'll figure out a good way to mount that filament sensor into the filament path. I just haven't had time to mess with that. Most of my other printers don't have the filament runout sensor, and I keep a close eye on my filament. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do here is remove the glass bed. So take the clips off, and since I'm going to be putting a PEI bed on here, and yes, I know this is a little dirty. It could use a cleaning. So I'll just retain those clips for maybe some future use. Take off this bed. Put that where I won't drop it and break it. Now we'll need to take off all of the thumb screws on the bottom. These little wheels where you adjust your, for adjusting your bed height. Okay, you want to retain those because we're going to be reusing them. Take off the bed and retain your springs because you're going to need to use those again. Don't lose any of them. I'm going to take out these machine screws for right now so that I don't lose them, but they will be used again. And be careful with your heated bed here so that you don't damage any of these connections here or anything. So next, on the front, I'm going to turn this up so you can see. There are 2 screws right here that need to be removed. That's not the right size. That's 3 M&Ms. Of course, retain these screws. You're going to be reusing them. Then on the front, there are 2 screws right here that also need to be removed. Loosen up your belt tension knob. In fact, take that clear off, because you're going to need to take it out of the bracket here. Retain that. Now these 2 screws to remove. We'll set this back upright. This is your belt tensioning screw right here. You'll need to loosen that up with the right driver. So that you can take this off. Now you're going to need to remove this screw right here, I think. We'll figure that out here in a minute. You're going to have to remove the belt from the bed, and in order to do that, you're going to have to be able, well, no, it comes out. I thought you were going to have to remove this here to do that first, but I guess not. So you just slide, and this comes off. And we will not be reusing that particular part. Don't let your other stuff get away from you here, though. Now next is to put the guide rails on. And they come in these little sheets here, little sleeves, and they are a little oily. They are a lot oily. They are a whole lot oily. And I know they need to be lubricated, but good grief. Paper towel time. I know these need to be lubricated, and I'll take care of that again afterwards, but for right now I don't need to have oil coating everything here. So as you'll see, you'll have the linear rail and you'll have this piece that sits on top, slides on there. And that will go on here, like so. But we got a little pre-work to do there first. There are screws here somewhere, and T-nuts. Here's the T-nuts. And we got a whole bunch of these screws. So you'll drop one of these screws into these recessed holes on here and start a T-nut on the back side of it. Just kind of get it started there. And they say to go every other hole. At least on the little video I saw, they were suggesting every other hole. And you're going to have 2 next to each other when you get to one end here. This is lots of fun when your fingers are all oily. So you'll be placing this on this rail. You have to get all your T-nuts going the right direction there so they drop into the extrusion. So it'll be something like that. That's where your alignment blocks come in. This narrow one here slips over the extrusion at the back, flush with the plate on the back. This will guide and keep this in the center. So what I'm going to do to start with here is just kind of snug one of these down a little bit. And that's not the right driver. That's going to be 2 M&Ms, it looks like. So we'll run this down until it just snugs up. I'll take my gauge block and move it up farther. Run one of these down until it just snugs up. Move my gauge block up front. I'm actually going to tighten this one. Make sure your rail is all the way back against your gauge block in the back. Back here, make sure everything is aligned. I'll snug these other ones up. Run these in the rest of the way. You want to make sure they're good and tight. It's not something you want slipping around. Like you could even use a little L-handled one they give you here to give you a little bit extra torque on it. Okay, I'm going to double check with my gauge block here. Make sure everything is aligned and the same all the way along, and it is. And there was a fly. It's December. Why is a fly in here? So now it's a lather, rinse, repeat. Do the same thing on this other side. Okay, after playing with this a little bit, look on this plate. These are not equidistant each direction, and the holes over here are not the same sizes. In this corner hole right here, we're going to have to put this screw in with a nut facing down, because that will trigger the Y-axis limit switch back here. And I believe that's why they give you this nylock nut here. I'm assuming that fits this screw. About to find out. And it does. So that will go right there in the smaller hole on that side. So these holes over here are larger. And that nut will have to be run all the way down. And because that's a nylock nut, you're going to have a little wrench to hold that. Okay, so when you're done, it'll look like this. And it'll sit on the bed like this with this screw in this back corner. Now next we need to put in this little bracket right here. And it goes on from the top. It would also fit from the bottom, but then it wouldn't sit on your linear rail thing right, so you need to have that on the top. You'll also notice that, you'll also notice that all 4 screw holes line up. To bolt it down, you would only use the first 2 screws here and leave these open, because you're going to need those openings to go down into your linear rail guides. These little screws here, and since there's no nuts, I assume they want you to use a T-nut on the back, which makes no sense, but that's what we got here, so that's what we'll use. Of course, you want to get them good and tight. That's going to be holding your belt. Okay, now after looking at the hardware package, we get all these little lock washers, and I didn't put this on video because I had to do these over. These little screws here need to have a lock washer on the top of them before they go down in this hole here and put your T-nuts on. So I had to do this thing over. It's just a matter of putting the lock washers on. That was kind of a pain in the, So now we got some little flat washers, and I am pretty well assuming I know where these go, considering how many we have of them. Looks like we'll have one spare. So you've got this plate put together, you got your belt guy on there, and you're going to need to put the belt back into the little slots before you put this plate down, or you're not going to hardly be able to get to them. So we'll do one there, do one here, and hopefully they stay put. And you set this down and line it up with your linear rail guides. holes should line up. Now you're going to have to make sure, I just discovered, since you're using T-nuts to hold this down, which way they're facing. Well, take this off, a little bit of a do-over. Like I said, there's no instructions here, so these need to be parallel. They can't be sticking out that direction. So they need to set like that so that they're not going to hit the bracket. In fact, that one is still not really straight. Yeah, I'll put my belt back in there again. And we'll set this back in place. Except now I got it backwards. Want to make sure you don't twist your belt when you're doing this. Want to make sure you do this so the teeth are to the inside. Okay, make sure your belt is not twisted. And we can line up the guide rail on here, and everything should line up now, and they do. So now you'll have a screw, a little lock washer, and then a flat washer. Don't tighten them up yet, just get them kind of started there. We got to make sure we're all aligned before we actually go cranking on anything. Okay, then once you have all the screws in, you can tighten them up. So this is something you're going to want to make sure they're good and tight. So here, use your L-handled wrench if you're using a ball driver, just to get that little bit of extra tightness to it. Don't go crazy and strip something out. Just want to make sure they're good and snug. Next we'll be putting the belt tension assembly back together. So this will go right back through here where it came out of. Of course, this will have to go like this. This down through the center of it. Screw your knob back on. I'm going to put a little bit of tension on that just to hold things. Look down in there and make sure that your belt is all the way up in those notches. And everything's straight. You don't have anything twisted. Everything's lined up right. You're on the sprocket in the back. Now you can take these shorter screws and put them back on the front. And that's not lining up. Now we'll start with the ones on the bottom. Because once you tighten that up, it'll line that screw hole back up there. That was what the problem was. Now I can put the ones in from the front. Okay, now once we got the two front screws in, you can set the belt tension here. Make sure this moves smoothly, it doesn't catch anywhere. And that you're screwing the back. Want to make sure this screw sticks down back there, contacts the limit switch like it should. And it does. So now we can put our heated bed back on. And I may upgrade my springs since I've got this apart. I'm a fan of these springs here. They're much stiffer than the stock springs, and it just makes things easier. So I've got 4 of those out here. Now it's a matter of putting the screws back in the bed here, and then springs and knobs. Looking to see which set of holes we use. We use the inside set. And I'll do the same thing at the back. Okay, my kit here came with a PEI bed with a magnetic base on it that will be mounting like this. And there's a adhesive backing here you pull off and then you stick this down on there. Well, before I do that, I'm going to need to remove this plastic film that's on the heated bed here. Sometimes this is easy and sometimes not, and so far this one's going pretty good. Yeah, I got most of it. Now I'll clean that with alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, not tequila, or rum or anything like that. Then I'll put my bed on there. This is just isopropyl alcohol here. Whoops, that was like way too much. That's fine. It'll evaporate. Make sure there's no oil on there since there's like oil everywhere from those rails. Let that dry a minute. I'll get my bed on there. In order to get my alignment on here perfect, I've sat down and turned the printer around so I have a very good view of it. So I'll just peel off this sheet from the back. So now I need to get this lined up perfectly on here before I let it adhere down all the way. That's why I'm sitting down here right in front of it so I can make sure everything is perfectly square. If you're not familiar with these PEI beds, they flex. So when you're done with your print, instead of having to maybe bang on it with something because it's stuck, you could just flex this and it'll pop right off. Then to put it back down, put it right back over the magnet, line it up, and you're good to go. I have that on one of my longer printers behind me here, and I absolutely love it. So I'll get some of these screws tightened up a little bit here. And these knobs. I'm going to run this way down. That way I make sure that my head does not hit the bed when I start this up again. I'm sure I'm going to have to do a little limit switch adjusting here. And I am assuming that's what this little knob is for, is replace this slotted screw. Because this is kind of hard to adjust with that slot on there. Okay, I got my springs squashed down pretty good there. I will back them out, of course. I won't leave them that way. Next, I think I am going to change this here. Put that thumb screw in instead. That spring is longer than a bed spring, so don't get them mixed up. There's a little collar here that sits over the top of. That spring don't do much there with that. Thumb screw is longer than the original screw. I think they may have done that because this raises the bed up. Okay, now my next little thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to lower my Z-axis rod down manually. See where that limit hits. Okay, my limit is made right there. I'll turn this around so you can see this a little better. So I've got a very large gap now between my head and the bed, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want to crash anything. So I can let these up a little bit now. Can't really do any leveling yet until I plug this in and home it. So I'm going to let it up quite a ways, but not until it hits the head or anything like that. Okay, gets the power to this thing. I'm going to have to go back to the shorter one here. This PEI bed is thinner than the glass bed, and with this new thumb screw they sent, I can't get the Z-axis down far enough to get close, even remotely close to the bed. So I'm going to have to go back to the shorter screw here. Okay, homing all here. Now we can do a little leveling. Go rid of the leveling button. We'll go to 0.1. Got this sort of close, kind of close. That's too loose there. We'll go to 0.2. Ooh, way too loose. 0.3. Well, that one pretty close there. 0.4. Oh, that one's right on. Oh. Back to 0.1. If you've never trimmed a bed before or leveled it, as you change one corner, the opposite corner will change. So you're going to have to keep going around until you get everything down perfect. That feels pretty good there. We'll go to back 0.2. It's pretty good there. 0.3. Just a hair. Okay, 0.4. Too tight. 0.5. The one you can never do anything about. That was actually a little tight. So I'm going to go back around here and loosen these up. Just back these off just a hair. 0.3. 0.4. I'll go back to 0.5. Much better. Okay, now I'm going to preheat the bed and do this all over again. Okay, we got the bed up to temperature here. I'll take this back to leveling. Go to 0.1. Push it home first. And there, 0.2. Things change a little bit when you heat the bed. 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5. Much better. Okay, now I need to load some film. Okay, I've got my head preheated here. I should be able to pull this right out. I've got some little partial spool of yellow here I'm going to use to do a little calibration cube or print something. We'll get that loaded in here. It's always fun when you get to the end of a spool because it's curled up so bad. Okay, I got my new filament loaded here. So I need to get a file here, and I will need to find a file. We're going to print a calibration cube here after I finally found the right file. Okay, so while my calibration cube is printing here, what do I think of this setup? The linear rails are great. I mean, I think that's fantastic. One thing I just noticed I needed to do was to tighten my screw down on my Y-axis belt adjustment so that it doesn't move. It shouldn't, but I just noticed I forgot to tighten that screw down. I don't want to do it while it's printing. Putting this kit on would have been nice if there would have been some type of printed directions or paint by number or pictures or something. And there is a little bit of hardware here. I have no idea what it's for. There's like way extra too many T-nuts here. I don't know if they just threw in a bunch of extra hardware. I got some extra washers. I got some extra little screws. Of course, this Z-axis stop here, because I switched to the PEI bed, this became too long. If I would have still been using the glass bed, which is thicker, then this would have worked. So I had to go back to the original one. I did change springs. I put on these heavier springs. I like these because it makes it a little harder to turn that knob, adjusting knob, but it tends to not move and it'll stay. Not that I've had problems with the stock springs on here, but since I already had it apart, might as well upgrade it. So we'll see how this calibration cube comes out. So far it looks like everything's printing good. I love these PEI beds. Stuff just sticks to it. You don't need any magic stuff to make stuff stick. It just does. And it's very easy to remove the parts. Just lift the bed up, give it a little flex, parts pop right off. So what do I think of the linear rails? Well, the Z-axis already has a linear rail on it. The X-axis already has a linear rail on it. There's no messing around with having to adjust eccentric nuts and having your wheels wobbly and wonky, and there's that wonky word, that's technical. These run right on those rails. Of course, with anything, you're going to have to keep it maintained. There was a lot of oil on it from the factory. I suppose that would be to keep it from rusting anywhere or whatever. You would need to keep a very light coat of machine oil on there, or something like you would use on a sewing machine or a fishing reel, that type of light oil, but it doesn't need to be like doused in it. Your Z-axis rod you need to keep lubricated as well, and of course you need to keep the stuff clean. Otherwise, maintenance-wise, this is going to eliminate a lot of what you would get as these wear, and you're not messing with these eccentric nuts anymore and trying to keep pressure and wondering if it's going to stay. And so I've got a few spare parts here now, but this will work out okay. Do I need to change any settings? Well, yes, on the Z-axis. Because the level of this is now elevated a little bit, but yet with the magnetic bed it's a little bit less than with the glass bed, I need to figure out what my total Z-axis height is. Of course, I rarely ever print anything all the way up to the top, unless I'm doing a vase or something, and I don't do that very often. So I will need to kind of calculate that. I think originally it was 200 millimeter. This, I may change the setting to say 180 just to be safe, and then kind of mess with it from there, see how much travel I can get before it maxes out at the top. Bed size stays the same, it's 210 millimeter square, so nothing changed there. Well, there it is. Let's see what we got here. Oh, I got that right off of there. Come on, 0. There we go. On Y, we got 20.01. X, we have even 20. And Z, 20.2, that's a little bit off, but I'm not going to worry about that. Or maybe I've just got it grabbed in the wrong place. Nope, it's the same all the way. So, yeah, works. So, was it worth it? Well, I think so. Again, don't forget to print these two gauge blocks before, or jigs, or whatever you want to call them, alignment tools or whatever, before you tear your printer apart, unless you got another printer you can print these on, because you're going to need these. Overall, it wasn't too bad. A little bit fiddly sometimes because you got some hardware there you really didn't know where it went. You had, like for example, I forgot to put the lock washers onto the screws into the rails because, well, I didn't really notice them. And then after I got ready to put the bed onto the guardrails, I noticed I had all these lock washers. So I'm looking around to figure out where they all went, and that was the only logical place they could go. And yes, there are a few extra screws there, but a lot of the manufacturers anymore seem to put in a few extra screws so that if you have something with a bad thread or whatever, you're not calling your tech support line. So, yep, got her upgraded. So if you got anything out of this, appreciate getting a thumbs up. I know it may have been in way too much detail for some people, but this was, it could be a little more complex if you're not used to working on things like this. Well, I'm Roger in the loft above the shop. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.